course, energy efficiency is something very close to my heart too, and eceee is also a long-lasting story. Now, I think we get to a point where we have to see better how energy efficiency can contribute in the next period to the objectives we have for the EU energy policy. And I think we have to take a realistic view and to put things into a perspective. And the world has changed since the time when the energy climate change package was negotiated. Meanwhile, we had an economic crisis. Meanwhile, we had the changes in worldwide policies on energy. We had the shale gas revolution in the US. We had the stop of really commitment to climate change discussion in the global context. And I think we have to look at the things as they are and not only as we wish they are, because it doesn't help. So if we want to solve a problem, I think first thing is to accept it's a problem or an issue. And then also energy efficiency, but not only, also renewables, also other sources of energy. Now, what we aim for is to treat them in perspective of challenges we have to face most at European level. We are fully committed, and I think also the next Commission will continue in EU to be fully committed to a low carbon economy and to a 2050 perspective, which would combine a low carbon economy and sustainability with the issue of competitiveness and security of supply. So agreeing on the long-term objectives, it's perhaps not so difficult in a way, but we have to also see the path and the ways to get there in a way which to be also competitive and sustainable in the transition phase. Because the first precondition to be sustainable in long term is to be alive in present. I think everybody should tend to agree with that. So what we see now in terms of challenges for the next years and for the next 15 to 20 years, it's import dependency. It's real, and it's not only for the EU in a global context. And if we look, IEA came now with the latest outlook, but also the previous ones. By 2030, it's estimated the world energy demand will increase by at least 30%. That's a reality. So the competition for resources will grow even further with all the things we have seen this can bring, including political instability and maybe wars and maybe other things. So in this context, of course, energy efficiency is, as we said also in the roadmap 2050, the first thing to do. And we think strongly emphasize this aspect. The same goes for Europe, even if we look, for example, in terms of gas dependency. So, but I will come maybe to, I think I have a couple of slides which illustrates this a little bit better. So, import dependency, high energy prices, and decarbonization are and will stay in a combination in which you have to find the best equilibrium of solutions as priorities for energy policy. Speaking about import dependence for Europe, if we look at gas, it's clear that even for gas in a 2030 perspective, it is expected to increase from 60 to 80% import dependency. And for most other regions of the world, the import dependency will increase, except US. And this is perhaps one of the big questions, is US going to become a net gas exporter? Of course, this will change in a way the perspective. And of course, we think maybe gas is not the most efficient and the most low carbon economy source, but if we look at the last couple of years, US has managed to reduce CO2 emissions. So here again, I think we have to be a little bit nuanced. In terms of energy prices, yeah, it's a reality. It's a reality that in Europe, the level of energy prices is higher than in the US. And for gas in particular, it's maybe 4 times higher. But here you have the end-use electricity prices for industry, which can be 3 to 4 times higher for especially energy-intensive industries in Europe. That's a real challenge. Again, energy efficiency can be part of the answer to that, and we promote it. It's not something to ignore, because what we aim in the end is not the absolute level of prices, but the energy bills and how to make industry and economy competitive. But we have to look at the facts. And the facts also show that this higher level of prices, retail prices, is not just because of the shale gas in the US. There are a lot of other elements like taxation, like grid cost and so on, which are reflected in the final level of the energy prices. So it's something to look at. The Commission will come soon with a report addressing these various aspects and components of energy prices. In any case, speaking about competitiveness, if we want to make Europe more competitive, we have to find solutions which to address the fact that energy prices are higher in Europe than in US, and labor costs are much higher in Europe than in China. Otherwise, we cannot make a competitive European economy. What I want to mention here in relation to prices, and perhaps it's relevant, is that the first thing we have done, and we continue to do, and we are committed to do over the coming year, even if the internal market will not be completely completed by the end of next year, but still we made good progress. And at the level, at least, of the wholesale market, we saw that the increase, which you can note here, of electricity prices went much lower than the increase of crude oil and gas prices and coal. So the simple fact of creating a fluid internal market in energy has helped keeping somehow prices in control. So completing the internal market is perhaps one of the first things to do. As I mentioned before, there are other elements, including taxation and so on, which have to be dealt and assessed realistically, because otherwise we cannot always find the best solution in terms of equilibrium between labor taxation and energy taxation and so on in a move towards a low carbon economy. Now, how are I going to address all these things? As I said, the first thing for us is to complete the internal market while putting the consumers more into focus. But the next is to improve energy efficiency, and improving energy efficiency across all the sectors of the economy, supply side, demand side, industrial and buildings. And for this we have the directive, which I will refer a little bit further in the presentation, but not only. We need, if we want to achieve a low carbon economy, we will need higher shares of renewables. But here we have again to look realistically at what has happened, and as good friends as we are for renewables, to see what has not worked and what we need to fix. Or maybe it's not that it has not worked, but it was one thing to start with a low level of renewables from 2% to move to 10, and it's another thing when we speak about 20 or 30% level of renewables into the energy systems. The biggest challenge for the future will not be the cost of renewables, of production of 1 megawatt hour in renewable, because this, with technology progress and so on, has decreased and will continue to decrease, but it's the integration of this into the energy system, because with the current solutions we have, we'll need a lot of backup capacity, which means double investments. And that is why UK is moving into putting nuclear electricity more into the energy mix. They made their calculations. So, and of course, energy mix by definition also means energy mix. You have to accept there are more, not just one single source of energy in it. That's why it's an energy mix. But in this context, we came now with some ideas and some guidance on supporting renewable support schemes, but it will be even more required about how to integrate larger amount of renewables in the energy systems through demand side management, through smarter grids and infrastructure, through energy storage, through better interoperability of electricity and gas networks. All these things will have to be put into the equation to make renewables more cost effective, when they will not be just 10 and 20%, but maybe 30 or 50% especially for electricity generation. If we want to handle in an efficient way the intermittence they bring into the system, because now we could stay for half an hour without electricity, but this will not be a normal business to run. We have to develop synergies between renewables and certain fossil fuels like natural gas, and here power to gas. So when we have really large amount of renewables, instead of not using it or having minus cost, we better convert it into hydrogen and blend it into the natural gas networks, or produce synthetic methane, which again can be blended and build some synergies in the transition to what will be a system by 2050, because we're, and this has to be understood, we have an objective for 2050, but we have to also manage in a cost-effective and sustainable way the transition to that system. Of course, we'll need to improve infrastructure, and we'll continue to need to also diversify energy supplies. So basically, we need to act on technologies, we need to act on regulations, we need to act on financing. And in this context, of course, is something which you all know very well in this audience, is the Energy Efficiency Directive, which now will give a strong push to start to be not only transposed but also implemented by member states, and which de facto will, if properly implemented, will also help reaching this 20% objective we have in terms of primary energy savings by 2020, and will set the basis also for further progress for 2030, even if perhaps more actions and more measures will be for sure necessary to be developed. But a lot of focus has to go now onto implementation and monitoring of the measures which are foreseen in the directive. Now, it's not only the regulation. So when what instruments the EU has at its disposal, it's of course, it's first of all is the legislation, regulations, and in parallel to that is technological progress. So we act on both, but at the same time there are other supportive policies which are in a way integrating and bringing to life more policy objectives we have at EU level. One of those being the cohesion policy. And the cohesion policy for the next period has earmarked at least 23 billion euros for the transition to low carbon economy. This transition to low carbon economy means in principle energy efficiency, smart grids, renewables, and urban mobility. So within this envelope will be a certain competition, and again countries may allocate even more than that, because I'll come back to that, there is a certain minimal ring fencing. At the same time, we have the Horizon 2020 to help technologies advancing, and this will be based a lot on this challenge-based approach in terms of securing effectiveness, efficiency, security of supply, and putting the various technologies competing against each other to get the best results out of this competition in relation to a secure, clean, and efficient energy. And the budget for that is significantly higher than in previous period. We also have the Connecting Europe facility with about 5.2 billion. It's less than initially foreseen, but can be complemented by structural funds. It's important to mention. And here again, we put a certain focus on those projects which will facilitate the large-scale integration, for example, of renewable systems. We have also other structural investment funds where energy efficiency can be found, being in agriculture funds or rural development and maritime and fisheries fund, plus life, plus and COSME to deal with certain aspects. Now, speaking about the cohesion policy, and which I called to say about energy efficiency being at the crossroad of the cohesion and energy policies, is because for us, from an energy policy point of view, is perhaps the first thing to do. Is We still call it a no-regret option. Also, our Director General and our Commissioner are fully supporting on that and try to Europeanize energy policies around these concepts. And it's a process now in which all member states have to develop, first of all, the partnership agreements in which they set the priorities, the long-term objectives for 2020, in what areas they want to allocate money, how they fulfill is an important element, ex-ante conditionalities, and some of these are provisions in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. They have to develop cost-optimal methodology before being able to spend money on buildings. Of course, we don't want this to be a barrier of allocating money in buildings, so we work together with our colleagues in the region and with the member states to make things advancing in parallel and in the right direction. By the end of this year, actually, we will have, based on the previous position papers, we will have the partnership agreements perhaps agreed with informally with most of the member states, and we'll have the inter-service formal consultation, and the operational programs, which will come a couple of months later, and which operational programs will go in details for energy efficiency, for renewables, for low carbon economy, or for what is now priority 7 energy large-scale infrastructure. Because this is something which is quite important in terms of cohesion policy for the next period. If you ask me what would be the two most important things, on one is the thematic objectives and the thematic concentrations. There are 11 priority areas where you can see 4 is shift to a low carbon economy and 7 is sustainable transport, which changed now the name is sustainable transport and key infrastructures, which include also energy infrastructure, in particular in relation to transmission level, where to help integration of larger scale, for example, of renewables into the energy systems. While the shift to a low carbon economy provides already for a significant ring fencing of 12% for the minimum for the less developed regions, 15 for and 20% for the most developed regions in terms of allocation for a low carbon economy. It's also important to note that the ceiling which we had in the previous period of 4% of ERDF to be allocated for buildings, it's not there anymore. So actually we can support member states to go even further than this minimum ceilings and ring fencing which is foreseen in the cohesion package and regulation. So basically significant resources will be here, but as I said, cohesion policy has now to rely very much on the concept of this thematic concentration, focus on the priorities, and on the other hand on leveraging. According to some calculations we made, so even these 23 billion I mentioned are a significant sum of money, but it's not enough for the needs we have. And if we look at the building across Europe, we have 25 billion square meters. If it is to renovate that, I'm not saying that this is feasible to be done by 2020, and we have not proposed it, but it would cost perhaps 1 trillion euros. 23 billion hardly represents 2% of that. So it's clear that it's necessary to mobilize the whole private sector, public sector, and so on, investments to create a good investment climate, to have this deep renovation also of the building sector, maybe not by 2020, but by 2030, de facto happening, and secures the transition to a low carbon economy. So thank you very much so far, and here you have the provisional allocations for member states, for at least for the cohesion policy, and you can see that some of the countries with significant allocations and also some of the countries with higher energy intensities and significant potential for improving energy efficiency, and we are definitely determined to work together with them on using also these resources and in leveraging private resources to get higher level of efficiency in those countries. Thank you.